Black Dahlia Episode 16. The Mob Did It? As we saw in previous episodes, the Florentine Gardens was a popular nightclub managed by Mark Hansen, which featured popular, girly and near-nudie shows choreographed by Nils Thor Granlund aka NTG. Many hopeful young starlets of the day tried out for the floor show as springboards for their careers. Future movie and television stars such as Betty Hutton, Jean Wallace, and Yvonne DiCarlo appeared along with future Broadway star Gwen Verdon, along with notable burlesque performers such as Marie the Body McDonald, and Lily St. Cyr. But for every success story there are many more tales of failed dreams and even nightmares of abuse. NTG rented a room above Mark Hansen's garage where many of the girls tried out for the floor show in his bed. A former prostitute, Judy Walters, tried to follow her dreams of a better life only to find the work environment at the Florentine Gardens little better.
I was supposed to have been another discovery like Betty Hutton or somebody. I was promised spots in NTG's floor show at the Gardens instead of wet nursing the customers. The drinks were watered, and the food wasn't fit for a dog, and we were supposed to see that the suckers left in good spirits, and with empty pockets. Bugsy Siegel was around there once or twice. I don't know, maybe more than that, and I was looking for a way to get to Vegas, to work for Siegel, and Mo Sedway, who was living at the Roosevelt Hotel then. I knew they wanted NTG to head the Flamingo, so I stayed on, but whatever promises were made anyone at the Gardens, it didn't ever happen. Instead of getting in the chorus and being a showgirl, I ended up dancing with winos and sex fiends at Hansen's Roseland Ballroom downtown.
Hansen himself had acquired a taste for deviance and attended sex parties in Malibu with his friend and other Black Dahlia murder suspect, Dr. Patrick S. O'Reilly, who had nearly beaten his secretary to death in a torturous act of sexual sadism, and cut off his own right pectoral muscle in a similar fashion to how a large portion of Beth's right breast had been removed. While it has never been proven that Mark Hansen was involved in anything illegal, at least he was never charged with anything. There was a known Mafia influence in the Florentine Gardens. Most notably, Jimmy Utley ran an illegal card game gambling room. We have also looked at the popular theory that Leslie Dillon was linked to Mark Hansen and killed Beth at his behest. But it has never been proven that Dillon knew Hansen. Whether or not Hansen and Dillon knew one another or Dillon did it on his own are dubious theories at best, relying on only a narrow timetable of opportunity. At any rate, Dillon would not have had the skill to do the bisection as neatly and surgically precise as it was done. I find it far more likely that Dr. Patrick S. O'Reilly, who, as previously mentioned, was a known friend of Hansen's, would have done it. And that is the only thread connecting Hansen to a possible murderer that I can see. As Mark Hansen knew both Beth and O'Reilly, it would have been highly unlikely that Mark Hansen wouldn't have profited from the gambling activity going on right under his nose, but it would have been more like tipping the manager to keep him satisfied and to keep his mouth shut. From what I've seen and presented, I don't see Mark Hansen being directly involved in the murder, but could the murder have been committed by people affiliated with him or who were a part of or affiliated with the Florentine Gardens community? Norman Chandler, heir to Chandler Publications, who became president at the time of his father's, Harry Chandler's, death in 1944, now controlled publication of the Los Angeles Times. He also had a hand in creating the Florentine Gardens along with architect Gordon B. Kaufman. The parent company of the Los Angeles Times was the Times-Mirror Company. The Times-Mirror Company owned the Florentine Gardens, leasing it to Guido Braccini. In 1944, the year of Harry Chandler's death, the Times-Mirror Company sold the Florentine Gardens to Flogar Incorporated. But the parent company of the Los Angeles Times, the Times-Mirror Company, was controlled by the Chandler family, which maintained over half the company's voting stock until well into the 1990s. The size and publication holdings of the Times-Mirror Company shows just how large an influence the Chandler family had, not just the heirs of Harry Chandler, but the heirs of Norman Chandler. Norman was also said to have a taste for the ladies, but, due to the extreme conservative leanings of the Los Angeles Times and other publications controlled by the Times-Mirror Company, he needed to keep his womanizing a secret from the scrutinizing gaze of public attention. He used his power and influence to see that his dalliances were kept out of the paper. LAPD Vice Officer Vince Carter had this to say about Norman Chandler.
A lot of what was not printed about Chandler was common knowledge in administrative vice and the upper echelons of the Los Angeles Police Department, a department of the city government in which Chandler always had an intense and close, if usually covert, working relationship.
And here is where Norman Chandler comes into this theory. He got Beth Short pregnant and needed to cover it up. Apparently, Beth had become a prostitute working for Brenda Allen's prostitution ring. And that pretty much stops this theory dead in its tracks, as it is known that Beth was not a prostitute, and she was not pregnant due to an autopsy conducted by doctors Frederick D. Newbar and Victor Cefalu. The autopsy stated,
"The uterus is small, and no pregnancy is apparent. The tubes, ovaries, and cul-de-sac are intact."
But Newbar was told to leave out some details at the coroner's inquest hearing.
"Doctor, I don't believe it will be necessary for you to read all this. It is rather long, and I don't think we need to read all of it here."
And the part about Beth's uterus and no apparent pregnancy was left out of the coroner's inquest, but later referenced in the district attorney's investigation files, see link below. People who still support this theory and claim Beth was pregnant claim that her pregnancy was deliberately left out of the inquest testimony so that knowledge of her pregnancy could be used as a control question to weed out false confessors. Of course, knowledge of an assumed pregnancy could have been used to weed out confessors as well. Any confessing Sams claiming to have knowledge that Beth had been pregnant would have been discredited. What was not left out of the coroner's inquest?
There is a gaping laceration 4½ inches, which extends longitudinally from the umbilicus to the suprapubic area.
While the laceration in Beth's suprapubic region does resemble a vertical hysterectomy, it was not. Leslie Dillon claimed it was so that the killer could see how far his penis penetrated her. But why this laceration was done for is open to speculation. Many of the books detailing supposed mafia involvement in the Black Dahlia murder spend long chapters focusing on the history of Los Angeles corruption and the histories of local mobsters such as Jack Dragna and Mickey Cohen, and then looking into their more nationally famous counterparts like Benjamin, Bugsy, Siegel. They then throw in Brenda Allen and her prostitutes. And finally top it off with an abortion ring, usually with Dr. Leslie Audrain doing the bisection. Yeah. And then this is where they throw in police corruption to cover it all up. Any of these topics would make interesting episodes. Looking into them here in great detail would take at least a few episodes, but sadly, I think it would mostly be a waste of time in researching the Black Dahlia murder. But for the sake of covering as many bases as possible, let's look into the theory. Let's look at the group. Jack Anderson Wilson aka Arnold Smith, the prime suspect in John Gilmore's Severed. Albert Louis Greenberg. Maurice Clement, who turns up frequently in Dahlia Theories. Dr. Leslie C. Audrain. And Bugsy Siegel. Right here I have to wonder why someone as high up as Siegel would play a part in the murder of what this theory calls a prostitute. A four-mobster team of thugs led by one of the most notorious gangsters of the day and a doctor to bisect her corpse in a surgically precise way. All that for a prostitute who got pregnant and threatened to talk. Why would it take 5 people to murder Beth and then have a doctor cut her in half? You'd think she was a dangerous assassin. Even if they wanted to intimidate rival mobster Jack Dragna, as this theory surmises, why didn't they dump her in his front yard or across the street or at the very least down the block, and not blocks away? Hell, leave out the doctor and they'd have a good team for a drive-by on Dragna's house. Let's look at some of the other players. Greenberg was a man of many aliases: Al Green, Albert Green, Al Green with an E, Albert Green with an E, Abe Greenberg, Al Greenberg, Alan Grun, Abe Grunberg, Al Grunberg, Al Grunberg, but his full name appears to have been Albert Abraham Grunberg. Greenberg was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota on May 10, 1900, and died in Los Angeles on February 21, 1967. A lifetime career criminal, he had a criminal history almost as long as the distance between those two cities for racketeering, robbery, kidnapping, bootlegging, and bookmaking. He did time in Minnesota at St. Cloud Correctional Facility for a 1920 robbery, serving from 1921 to 1924, after which he moved to Los Angeles. I'll put a link below to a website detailing Greenberg's full biography and criminal history. In Donald Wolfe's book The Black Dahlia Files, he lists Greenberg as Albert Louis Greenberg, but does state that he had a Hollywood bar, Al Green's Night Spot, at 1735 North McCadden, where the McCadden gang operated. According to Wolfe, one of the members of the McCadden gang was Jack Anderson Wilson, favorite suspect of John Gilmore in his book Severed. Something you see a lot of in different Dahlia theories is what appears to be a necessity for authors to shoehorn in as many suspects as possible to tie together as many theories as possible. These theories then become a greater and greater stretch as more and more claims are debunked. Maurice Clement is another name that frequently turns up, and his name does appear on the district attorney's suspect list, and his name was in Beth's address book that she either stole or was gifted from Mark Hansen. According to Wolfe, Clement was a procurer of prostitutes for Brenda Allen's prostitution ring. The name Maurice also shows up frequently as being Beth's mysterious driver and benefactor that sometimes paid her bills. What is known is that he worked for Columbia Studios. Dr. Leslie C. Audrain is frequently added to a list of alleged abortionists going all the way back to Sergeant Charles Stoker's 1950 book Thicker and Thieves, which is generally credited in some Dahlia theories as proof of police corruption, and as we can see from the following quote from the book, may have been one of the reasons why Beth was sometimes considered a prostitute, from pages 114 and 115 of Thicker and Thieves.
Sergeant Robinson called me in. He said that he was particularly interested in having me concentrate my efforts on a large hotel, located near the downtown district. He told me that the owner of this hotel had at one time been a suspect in the Black Dahlia murder. It will be recalled that the victim in this case had been 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, whose body was dissected and scattered onto a vacant lot at 39th Street and Norton Avenue by a sadistic sex fiend. According to Robinson, the murdered girl had lived in the hotel for a few weeks. He said he had information that the hotel owner and others ran advertisements in newspapers in small southern cities offering girls employment as models in Hollywood. Girls answering these advertisements, Robinson said, were ordered to report to the hotel in Hollywood, where efforts were made to induce them to enter a life of prostitution. It was a known fact that many prostitutes lived at the hotel. We discussed ways and means of furthering the investigation. I suggested that we borrow a policewoman who had worked with me on a previous case. This policewoman could register at the hotel, give the impression that she was a prostitute and glean much valuable information. With the knowledge thus gained, we could make a number of arrests, and possibly arrest the owner and abate the hotel under the Red Light Abatement Act.
Seeing that accusations of police cover-ups comes up frequently when investigating the Dahlia murder, this will be looked at in another episode. As for the abortion ring as it pertains to the Black Dahlia murder, here is an excerpt from Thicker and Thieves pages 147, 148, and 149 where Stoker details the investigation into Dr. Audrain.
An organized abortion ring was operating within the city of Los Angeles, headed by a Dr. Audrain, he said. This inspector and others intuitively felt that its doctors were being protected by a very unique method. Actually, any person outside the ring was directly shaken down by homicide detectives of the police department, working through a setup that was maintained for that particular purpose. He detailed the medical board's method of operation. Upon receipt of a complaint or information that abortions were being performed by doctors, chiropractors, midwives or others, the board would make an investigation. Although it had powers to make arrests, the board's policy was to furnish information to the Homicide Bureau of the Los Angeles Police Department, or to the district attorney's office, and to allow those two law enforcement agencies to effect the arrests. After conviction of the abortionist, the medical board would go to the state with the information and the supporting results of the conviction and would then take action against the implicated physicians or other persons licensed by the state who were involved. To this inspector and to others it appeared that when positive and conclusive information or evidence were conveyed to their immediate superior, even if an arrest were made, it was smothered and no action was taken. 2. It appeared that when they themselves were working on the case, the guilty doctors were invariably tipped off if they were members of the protected abortion ring. However, when information was obtained on some doctor outside the clique, or on someone who was without funds, in almost every instance a prosecution and a conviction would result. Their purpose in meeting me was to enlist my aid at that particular time. Inasmuch as their superior was on his vacation, they felt that anything they could accomplish while he was away would keep them from having to go through the police homicide squad. They wanted me to function secretly in place of the homicide squad. I knew that I would be sticking my neck out by entering this protected phase of police work. I went to Lieutenant Ed Blair, in charge of Vice, and told him that the state inspectors wanted me to help them. I informed Blair quite frankly that they suspected homicide officers of taking payoffs to protect the abortion ring. Blair advised me to go ahead, but reminded me to take it easy. He didn't want to become involved. A smart officer. The medical board men then told me that they knew the identity of a woman who had gone to the suspected Dr. Audrain, who, incidentally, was the purported head man in the ring. They suggested that I obtain the services of a policewoman, who could go to the doctor, pose as a pregnant woman, and give the name of their informant as a reference for the purpose of having Dr. Audrain perform an abortion on her. I told policewoman Audrey Davis none of the particulars of this case other than to state exactly what I wanted her to do. We arranged the details and she went to the doctor's office. The nurse gave her a casual examination. Perhaps I should make it clear that any woman who goes to an abortionist, whether or not she is pregnant, will be told that she is pregnant and that an abortion should be performed. Policewoman Davis was given an appointment for the latter part of the following week. She was directed to bring $250 with her and to come early. The appointment hour was 7:30 a.m. We knew that doctors performing abortions usually handled them in their offices between the hours of midnight and 9 a.m. At the appointed hour, Officer Ruggles, the policewoman, and I met the two inspectors from the State Medical Board. The inspectors were down in the mouth. "Sergeant, the deal is all shot to hell," one of them exclaimed. He added that their boss had returned from his vacation the day before and that they wouldn't dare proceed without first telling him. The other remarked that, although he had been told to go ahead, he well knew that the doctor was probably in Old Mexico by now. Being unacquainted with all the facts, I was consequently unconvinced. "What the hell," I retorted. "Let's take a chance. What have we got to lose?" I ordered policewoman Davis to keep the appointment. We planned to allow her 30 minutes in the office at 6th and St. Paul Streets. Miss Davis left. A few minutes later, the three officers and I followed her into the building. We found the doors of the medical offices tightly locked. With the exception of two nervous customers waiting in the hall, the place was deserted. Then I was convinced that the medical inspectors were right. The planned raid had been tipped off. To satisfy my own curiosity, I checked throughout the following week, and to my knowledge the good doctor never returned. The incident seemed to be closed, and I erased the abortion racket from my mind, since it was outside of my duties.
Dr. Audrain was never charged with anything. In 1939, he and several others were caught up in an extortion plot by a one Frank John Thomas Boyle who tried to extort $500 from Audrain. Audrain filed a complaint with the FBI about the incident, thus opening himself to any scrutiny to arise during the investigation. Audrain was dead before Stoker published his book, so we only have his allegations against Audrain to go on until his name started turning up in Dahlia theories. Donald Wolfe's story of the Black Dahlia murder went something like this. 836 Catalina Street was the location of a bungalow court maintained by Brenda Allen for her prostitutes who worked the nearby Ambassador Hotel stayed. Two gangster squad officers Archie Case and James Ahern, previously mentioned as part of the Leslie Dillon investigation, were staking out Lucy's Bar and Grill on Melrose Avenue on the night of January 14, 1947. After completing the stakeout, they noticed a black sedan with its headlights off run a red light and followed it to the 836 Catalina Bungalow Court. There, they witnessed 3 individuals exit the vehicle and headed to the bungalows. After the driver later left the car, Case and Ahern followed him. They caught up to him as he approached the bungalow that the other 3 had entered. When they identified themselves as police, the man fled into the bungalow. Case and Ahern drew their handguns and chased him inside, telling the occupants to raise their hands. The leader of the group produced a police courtesy card signed by Captain Donahoe and showing the captain's home phone number. Ahern went to the phone while Case held the group at gunpoint. As Ahern started to make the call, he noticed a bloodstain on the floor. He noticed more bloodstains smeared along the hallway and followed the blood trail to a bathroom littered with blood-soaked towels and covered in pooled and spattered blood. More blood was pooled in the bottom of the bathtub and its sides were streaked with smeared blood. The men refused to talk to anyone but Captain Donahoe, who said he was on his way. When Donahoe arrived, he took the holder of the courtesy card into the kitchen. Donahoe later told the 2 officers that there had been a poker game that had gotten out of hand when the men got drunk and got in a fight. Ahern would later state his suspicion of this story as there was no sign of a fight and the furniture was all in place. And although the men wore blood-stained clothes, none of them appeared to be injured. Donahoe reportedly sent Case and Ahern on their way with the warning.
"You don't know what you're dealing with. This guy could put all 3 of us in hell with one phone call."
After the body of Elizabeth Short was discovered on the morning of the 15th, Case and Ahern realized the lack of blood at the dump site meant that she had been killed at another location and assumed that she had been murdered at the Catalina Street bungalow. James Ahern later identified the man with the courtesy card as Bugsy Siegel. Okay, these guys were on the gangster squad and did not know Bugsy Siegel on site, and they arrived at the bungalow. Bugsy's face was all over the papers. He was well known. A lot of average people would have recognized him. Any cop would have known his face. If the Mafia did kill Beth Short, it would not have been for the simple reason of getting pregnant by the wrong person. There would have to be real reasons for their doing so. Beth was a nobody to the mob. She would have had to have witnessed something or known something that could have hurt a powerful mobster. For Bugsy Siegel to have been personally involved, he would have needed a personal reason for doing so. Yes, he was violent enough to do the severe beating and cutting Beth had been put through, but I don't see this kind of rage being inflicted for an impersonal murder to cover up a pregnancy. This theory just has so many holes that it's like trying to catch water with a sieve. Supposedly, Dr. Audrain had already left by the time Case and Ahern arrived. Bugsy, Greenberg, and Wilson been the first to leave the car, and Clement had been the one the officers followed to the door. Something interesting to mention is that the cuts on Beth's mouth either by chance or deliberate act form what is called a Glasgow smile, used by Scottish gangs to mark their victims. Gangs in Chelsea, England call the wound a Chelsea grin. Just something to consider, and if deliberate, could point to the national origin of the killer. Anyone wishing to look into this further can check out the book The Black Dahlia Files by Donald Wolfe. Or the book Fallen Angel by Troy Taylor pretty much tells the same story but is a much shorter read. Next week we'll look into the possibility of a police cover-up.